Good afternoon, members of the media and members of the public who are watching at home. Today, I'm joined by the Minister of Health and the Minister of Finance who will provide information from their respective ministries. The Minister of National Security is also joining us this evening and is able to answer any questions that members of the media may have. We will begin our press conference tonight with an update from the Minister of Health. Minister?
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, there were 1,149 test results received by the Ministry of Health, and none were positive for COVID-19. Bermuda has had 166 total confirmed positive cases, and their status is as follows. 147 have recovered, and there are 10 active cases who are all under active public health monitoring. None are hospitalized or in critical care, and the total deceased remains at 9. The average age of all of our confirmed positive cases is 58, and the age range of all of our positive cases is from 18 to 101 years of age. The source of all local cases is as follows. 61 are imported, 85 are local transmission with a known contact, 19 are local transmission with an unknown contact, and 1 is under investigation. Bermuda's country status remains at sporadic cases, and the 7-day average of real-time reproduction number is less than 1. On Monday, the Ministry of Health advised 18 positive cases, 3 were imported, and 1 is under investigation. All are isolated, and contact tracing began immediately. There's been much public speculation regarding one of the cases and the movements of that particular individual. I can advise you today that the staff at the Department of Health have since visited all of the places where the traveler went prior to receiving their positive test results. This included a number of restaurants, a gym, and a leisure boat. Staff visited for contact tracing purposes to answer any questions or concerns from individuals working in those venues and to ensure that appropriate cleaning and health protocols were in place. Now, some have wondered why the Ministry of Health did not name those locations in the media. I think this would be a good time to clarify that the public health is guided by the principle to only publicly name an establishment or business when there is an ongoing threat to the public or when there is no way that the epidemiology and surveillance unit can contact trace persons at that place. And in this instance, neither of those situations occurred. We must be aware of the negative impact of naming of an establishment could have on them to be branded with an unfair stigma which may affect the livelihoods of those working there. If they choose to publicly name themselves, then that is their prerogative. But please do not misunderstand me. Be assured that we would never put anyone's health in jeopardy for the whole sake of a business's privacy. It is important to note that 2 of Monday's new cases were recent travelers who had negative pre-departure tests and negative arrival tests, and they did not test positive until their subsequent tests. This reinforces something which I have mentioned previously. You are not out of the woods completely until you have received your negative result from your day 14 post-travel test. Symptoms of COVID-19 can take 14 days to develop. This is why travelers are not free to roam until they clear their day 14 test. Once travelers have 2 negative tests, then they can roam with the utmost care. But that means that they must physically distance, wear a mask, avoid large groups of people and the clinically vulnerable, as well as wash their hands often. It is not carte blanche to go partying with dozens of people. Anyone arriving into Bermuda remains under mandatory 14-day public health monitoring, which includes self-monitoring of their temperatures and symptoms daily, and reporting any symptoms to the epidemiology and surveillance team. And in addition, it is very important for travelers, and this means visitors and residents alike, to remember that you must remain in quarantine until you receive your individual results by email. There has been a small number of persons who broke quarantine because they heard on the news that there were no positive results on that particular day prior. And in fact, travelers must remain in quarantine until they receive their own personal emailed results of the negative test that is releases them from their quarantine. Now, as I announced on Tuesday, the cabinet has reviewed the traveler requirements for returning arriving passengers in Bermuda who do not have a pre-departure test. Effective Tuesday, the 25th of August, any traveler arriving in Bermuda without a pre departure test will be required to test on arrival and quarantine for at least 8 days. They will require a negative test result after day 8 to be released from quarantine. And this means that they will not have to do a day 4 test because obviously they'll be in quarantine. More importantly, the pre departure test must be taken in the country that you are departing. That is, a test taken in Bermuda will never count as a pre departure test to return to Bermuda. In addition, we have seen a couple of cases of residents traveling overseas, returning without a pre-test, and then breaking quarantine only to fly out again. This is a dangerous practice that puts you and others at risk. We ask you to be law abiding, responsible citizens and adhere to the quarantine requirements. We actively encourage residents to avoid non essential travel at this time. During a pandemic, a holiday will never be entirely safe. But if you must travel, it is best to get a pre departure test before you come back. This will keep you safe and prevent the mandatory 8-day quarantine on your return. To support the enforcement of quarantine, all passengers who arrive without a pre-test and are subject to the mandatory 8-day quarantine will be fitted with a quarantine monitoring bracelet that will be connected to their smartphone. Additionally, this week we activated the mandatory uploading of the pre-departure test for visitors during the travel authorization process. This should provide an added layer of safety for travelers and will further enhance and ensure compliance regarding the requirements for all visitors to Bermuda to have a pre-departure test before traveling to Bermuda. The exception to this requirement, of course, are those aged 9 and younger, who must upload a government ID with proof of their age in place of the pre-departure test. Finally, in light of this week's imported cases, I would like to encourage all businesses and public-facing establishments to reacquaint themselves with the guidance for each of their sectors, which can be found at coronavirus.gov.bm. Likewise, for the general public, you are also advised to ramp up preventative measures, wash your hands frequently, wear your mask diligently when mixing with other households, avoid large groups, and keep 6 feet away from others if you are unmasked. Remember a simple rule: avoid the 3 C's: closed spaces, crowded places, and close contact settings. Thank you, Bermuda, and stay safe.
Thank you, Minister of Health. I would like to reiterate your message of the simple steps that we can take to reduce the risk of additional spread of the virus. Wear your mask. Stop shaking hands. Be careful with the physical distance. Remember, many persons who are carriers of this virus are asymptomatic. That means that they don't have a fever, that they're not coughing, they literally have no symptoms and they feel perfectly fine. And if you're asymptomatic and you're at a funeral en masse, which is, of course, against the law, hugging senior citizens after a weekend of partying on the water, you could be unknowingly transmitting the virus. Remember, this virus requires a host, us humans. If it cannot jump from one human to another, it will not spread. I know how boring it is to keep your physical distance. I know how tedious it is to make sure that you follow the rules and to wear a mask. But we've all heard stories of from overseas of family dinners and outings that ended with multiple family members being lost to the virus. Let's not let our guard down. We can still enjoy ourselves, but we must be smart and keep each other safe. Rest assured, as we have done for the last 5 months, we will continue to protect Bermuda and its residents. You have heard me Others, and even overseas media, state that Bermuda's COVID-19 testing regime for arriving passengers is the most stringent in the world. The new measures that will be introduced by the government effective next Tuesday will ensure that persons who do not have a pre-departure test are subject to more strict requirements. There have been some who have asked, why do we not just require 14-day mandatory quarantine for all arriving passengers? A mandatory 14-day quarantine for all arriving passengers would effectively shut our tourism industry and close our hotels, putting hundreds and over 1,000 Bermudians out of work. One of the recommendations of the Economic Advisory Committee was to reopen our tourism industry with effective protections through aggressive testing and use of technology. The government has done that, and we will continue to strike the right balance between keeping our country safe and rebuilding our economy. The Minister of Finance will now speak more on the steps the government is taking to ensure a strong and broad-based economic recovery. Minister of Finance?
Thank you, Premier. Good evening. Today, I'm pleased to provide an update from the Ministry of Finance on the actions being taken to appropriately and proactively manage the economic challenges resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic. I will also report on how the economy has fared through our management of this crisis. Before I commence my report, however, I would like to thank the people of Bermuda with particular focus on our essential workers for what they continue to do to keep our island safe and our people healthy. The three main areas of focus of my remarks will be the recent bond offering, our fiscal first quarter performance, and the ongoing work in relation to the economic recovery plans and programs. I will start with the very positive news on the recently concluded bond offering. In my national budget statement delivered on the 1st of in February, I signaled an intention to evaluate market conditions to address borrowing requirements and refinancing opportunities for certain portions of Bermuda's indebtedness. However, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and unexpected expenditures have necessitated an offering larger than contemplated in the budget statement in order to assist the fiscal situation. On Monday, the Ministry of Finance assessed the international capital markets and raised $1.35 billion of new bonds. As part of our debt management program, we split the issue between 10-year and 30-year bonds with equal amounts of capital raised in each issue. Orders from investors significantly exceeded the amount offered, reflecting massive interest in Bermuda's credit. This allowed us to achieve record low coupons and spreads to treasuries. At the same time, it also allowed Bermuda to repurchase for cash a portion of our outstanding bonds and repay local credit facilities, all of which resulted in lower interest rates. The 10-year bonds were issued at a record low coupon of 2.375%, while the 30-year bonds was also favorably priced with a coupon of 3.375%. It is noteworthy that this is the first time that Bermuda has issued a 30-year bond. This allows the government to lock in historically low interest rates for a longer period of time. As noted in press reports on this matter, the offering commenced with a series of virtual meetings over 3 days last week to update investors primarily in the United States and Europe. With the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, investors were focused on steps the government is taking to mitigate the economic impact of the pandemic, largely contain it to this year, and position ourselves for a solid economic recovery. Feedback from prospective investors was very constructive and supportive of the proposed transaction. Accordingly, the offering on Monday attracted healthy demand from some of the world's top investors, allowing the government to execute on its strategy to not only fund large unexpected COVID-19 related expenditures, but also to refinance existing debt at much lower rates. While total debt has increased by about $520 million, the average interest rate on the entire portfolio has decreased by approximately 59 basis points, or 0.59%. Further details of the offering will be released by the Ministry of Finance in a separate press release. In that context, I will now turn to an update on the financial performance in the wake of COVID-19. With the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, it has had a profoundly negative impact on the Bermuda economy and consequently the government's fiscal position. The mandatory shelter in place, the closing of the airport, and the lack of cruise ship arrivals has impacted our businesses and our people. The headline numbers for the 2020-2021 national budget was a revenue target of $1.122 billion, current expenditures of $1.057 billion, including debt service, capital expenditures of $85 million, and a projected deficit of $19.8 million. However, as previously announced, the public health measures required to suppress COVID-19 have caused a severe economic shock in the Bermuda economy. The economic impact of COVID-19 has therefore had a severe knock-on effect on the 2020-2021 fiscal performance. The combination of lower fiscal revenues and higher public spending will cause the projected budget deficit of $19.8 million to significantly increase. Revenues for the 3 months ending June 30th, 2020 were $221.6 million, or $58.9 million, or 21% lower than in the budget estimates. The primary reason for this decrease was due to a shortfall in custom duty collections of approximately $20.7 million versus 2020-2021 budget estimates. With most stores and the borders remaining shut due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this has had a negative impact on goods being imported into the country. The pandemic also had a negative impact on passenger tax receipts, as there were no cruise ship arrivals from March to June, and all other receipts as the island was under the state of emergency declared by the governor on the 1st of April 2020, and the Emergency Powers COVID-19 Continuing Precautions Regulations of 2020. However, there was a bright spot as payroll tax for the period was $18.2 million higher than was estimated in the budget estimates at $134.9 million, which was collected for the first quarter. As a result of the impact of the pandemic, total revenues are tracking below budget estimates. However, with the reopening of the economy and the borders, we expect to see an increase in customs duty collections and other receipts for the remainder of the fiscal year. Current expenditures, excluding debt service for the first 3 months ending June 2020, were $281.6 million. This is $47.7 million, or 17% higher than the budget estimate. The increase in expenditure was mostly COVID-19 related, as $43.6 million was paid out for the unemployment benefit and $12.4 million was used to cover necessary public health measures to contain the spread of the virus. If not for the additional spending as a result of the pandemic, current expenditures would have been $8.3 million lower than the budget estimate. As to be expected, current expenditures excluding debt service are presently tracking ahead of budget estimates. The $281.6 million spent in the first 3 months of 2020-2021 represent approximately 30.1% of the total current account budget of $935.6 million. However, the Ministry of Finance COVID-19 fiscal plan calls for a re-examination and reduction of lower priority budget expenditures to ensure that spending needed for COVID-19 matters are maintained and the deficit is contained within an acceptable level. Accordingly, savings have been identified in several discretionary areas such as capital, grants, consultants, travel, repairs, and maintenance, etc. Additionally, to reduce the deficit further, other temporary payroll or government employee overhead savings are being considered, and the government has been in negotiations with the unions on this matter. I can advise that at this time, the 3 largest unions representing over 80% of public sector employees have agreed to government's cost-saving measures. Capital expenditures for the period ending June 30, 2020 are $9.8 million lower than budget estimates. This is due to the government's proactive approach to halt all capital projects that have not started and to rationalize which projects take priority over others. Capital expenditures are presently tracking below budget. The $11.4 million spent in the first 3 months represents approximately 13.5% of the total capital account of $85 million. However, as mentioned before, this budgeted amount will be revised as a result of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. For the first 3 months of 2020-2021, government incurred a deficit of $101.7 million compared to a deficit of $4.95 million in the budget estimate. This deficit was financed with both working capital and borrowing. This quarterly level of deficit is not only unsustainable, but economically and fiscally imprudent. It is vital that government achieves the cost reduction targets in this fiscal year. During these difficult times, it is critical that we continue to manage the fiscal affairs of the country with prudence. Gross debt at the end of June stood at $2.82 billion, and net of the sinking fund was $2.78 billion. After factoring in the impact of lost revenue, additional expenses related to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the government's cost-saving measures, our current estimate of deficit for the 2020-2021 fiscal year is $225 million. In making this estimate, we believe that the extraordinary COVID-19 related expenses that were recorded in the first fiscal quarter will not continue into the remainder of the year, and with the easing of restrictions, including the opening of our borders, we expect revenue to show improvement over the first quarter results. As previously noted, a critical part of the presentation to investors in the bond offering was providing information on the work being done to continually strengthen and build Bermuda's economy and to address the economic challenges arising from the pandemic. The economic strategy focusing on COVID-19 and beyond has 3 phases. The first phase focused on assisting businesses and persons to survive in the short term. This was of particular importance during the period where business activity was significantly curtailed as a result of the lockdown that government had to impose to ensure the health and safety of Bermuda's residents. With the opening of the airport and the resumption of greater levels of commerce, there is now increased focus on sustaining the economy and building on the ongoing work to stimulate the economy. It should be noted that there are 3 guiding principles which form part of the development and evaluation of the strategies and actions being incorporated into the plan. These are fairness and equity, financial prudence, and financial viability. And it is seen as paramount that actions taken must also consider the impact on the health and safety of Bermuda's residents. During this challenging period, I have therefore had extensive and ongoing discussions with my internal team and the various external advisors who play an important role in addressing the diverse and complex areas that make up the Bermuda economy. These include the Financial Policy Council, the Fiscal Responsibility Panel, the Bermuda Monetary Authority, and the Bermuda Business Development Agency, all of whom have provided very helpful advice during this period. In addition, the BDA and the BTA participated in the investor presentations to highlight the initiatives that they are undertaking, which are part of positioning Bermuda to successfully adapt to the new normal. I've also had more recently had the opportunity to expand my dialogue with industry partners, both in the domestic and international business sectors. This program, which is part of a communication strategy developed pre-COVID, is intended to strengthen existing business base. I think it is important to note that in these discussions, 1, there have been positive reactions by industry to the government's handling of the crisis, and 2, the effectiveness and the strength of the BMA as Bermuda's integrated financial services regulator. In relation to the development of the Economic Recovery Plan, the Economic Advisory Committee continues to play a key role. The Economic Advisory Committee has been meeting regularly, and they have prioritized ideas for the retention of existing business, growing existing sectors, and attracting new industries. As noted in previous updates, the Phase 1 focus was on quick wins to assist persons and entities to survive through the early stages of the pandemic and to take actions to mitigate the impact of the economic and financial challenges. There have been over 50 short-term ideas prioritized by industry, and their focus areas included taxes, jobs, immigration, tourism, technology, and new sector growth. All ideas have been submitted to the government for evaluation and approval, and work has been ongoing in relation to the implementation of a significant number of these proposals. As previously reported, some of the short-term ideas which the government has executed to date included the extension of the unemployment benefit, extension of payroll tax deferrals for restaurants and bars, amendment to the Employment Act in reference to redundancies, and implementing policies to attract long-term stay business visitors. A technology-related proposal from the EAC was to provide government digitization projects for small and medium-sized enterprise tech companies. I am pleased to report that the IDT is working closely with the Department of Workforce Development and the Bermuda Economic Development Committee to identify individuals and small to medium-sized businesses that have potential to undertake key government digitization projects. Many of the items recommended with regard to immigration are currently being addressed by the Board of Immigration as they review the work permit policy as the government continues its efforts to execute comprehensive immigration reform. The committee is currently developing medium-term strategies which can be implemented over the next year to 3 years in order to stabilize and grow the economy. The strategies are being refined and assessed for impact before final submission to the government. The committee is also working with the finance team to refine inputs being used in the model that was recently designed for Bermuda to assist in forecasting future deficits and facilitate more effective debt and fiscal management. Further, they're providing valuable information on the potential impact of COVID-19 on various sectors, which is key to being able to facilitate economic stabilization and growth in affected sectors. I would again express my gratitude to the members of the EAC for the significant investment of time and expertise into this initiative that is so important to Bermuda. I would further note that we continue to receive ideas from the wider community, and we appreciate the interest and considered thought that is evident through these submissions. It should also be highlighted that a small committee of young Bermudians, the majority of whom are still in university and college or in the early stages of their careers, have also been working to provide ideas to assist Bermuda in our economic recovery. This committee provided me with an initial presentation yesterday and will continue their deliberations over the coming weeks. COVID-19 has had an adverse impact on our lives, our health, and especially our economy. However, we've made considerable progress with managing the COVID-19 crisis, and we will continue to do so. Our progress is due to the hard work and dedication of our many frontline workers, other persons in the community, as well as many earnest and hardworking public officers. I would like to thank them all. As well, I would like to thank the team at the Ministry of Finance and our industry partners and stakeholders for their tremendous assistance and support as we continue strengthening our economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Finance. And congratulations on the most recent debt offering from the government of Bermuda. And although the figure is large, it is noticeable that the government of Bermuda will pay less costs on interest on an annual basis after this debt raise than we did before. So that is $6 million that will be saved due to the reduction of interest, which can be either saved or used on other priority items. So I want to congratulate you, Minister of Finance, for that excellent work of which you managed to accomplish. And I just reiterate, as I say to all persons inside of Bermuda, that the country is fortunate to have you as our Minister of Finance. As the Minister of Finance has stated, we are setting the stage for economic recovery by ensuring that the government can support the development of new industries, by providing funding and other measures at the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation, by making sure that we keep the business that we have and expand the business that we have, and continuing to meet with stakeholders to ensure that Bermuda has all hands on deck to continue the work that we've already started to rebuild our COVID affected economy. Wearing my tourism hat, the government of Bermuda continues to work with stakeholders to ensure that we can get more Bermudians back to work in hospitality. It is noticeable that there will be more hotels which are scheduled to open in the coming days and weeks, and this is certainly going to be relief to workers who are looking to get back to providing for their families and off of government assistance. To support the public health officers at the airport, the Bermuda Tourism Authority have introduced a tourism ambassadors program to answer general questions about Bermuda for travelers. They provide details about tourist attractions, restaurants, operating hours, etc. The tourism ambassadors, appropriately attired, are stationed at the airport, greeting tourists and answering queries that they may have. The ambassadors will continue to serve throughout this time, and as the numbers of arriving tourists increase, so will the number of ambassadors, ensuring hospitality and great customer service as they arrive. I have been asked to relay a message by the Minister of Education, and so I will relay that now. Representatives from the Ministry of Education and the Bermuda Union of Teachers have been meeting over the past few weeks to discuss the reopening of our public school system in September 2020. There was extensive discussions about the entry to exit safety and health protocols for the various school levels, staffing, school hygiene supplies, the hybrid learning model, the cleaning of schools, and the first week of school. Recognizing the safety and health of students and school staff is paramount. The Ministry of Education and the Bermuda Union of Teachers both came to the agreement that it would be best to delay the return of students by 3 school days until Monday, September 14th, to afford staff the time to learn and take on board the numerous safety and health protocols to ensure a safe environment for staff and students. School staff will still return on September 1st, and the additional 3 days will allow full professional development for staff to focus on safety and health protocols, entry to exit of school buildings, isolating sick staff and students, special services programs, school evacuations, and the requirements for food services as developed by the Department of Health. Before I close, I would like to speak about the government's online forum for the post-COVID-19 economic recovery. First, I want to thank, as the Minister of Finance has thanked, the persons who have taken the time to share their ideas. Most of the respondents were imaginative, thoughtful, creative, and pioneering. And I wish to remind persons that it is not too late to go ahead and submit an idea and continue to engage in the forum. The ideas covered everything from tax reform to repealing the Spirits Act, a law that made it illegal to distill alcohol, but legal to brew beer. There are many people who wanted a totally pedestrianized city, and there were people who wanted to be allowed to use their pensions to invest in local businesses whose plans have been approved. Some of the ideas which have been submitted have already been put into place. But the vast majority of submissions were also about how in Bermuda we can be more innovative than what we have. In the past, it was said that necessity is the mother of invention, meaning that when push comes to shove or a want becomes a need, that is when people invent. After 2020, people may come to say that COVID-19 continue to be Bermuda's story. We must continue to be innovators. It is the innovation that we have seen that has made Bermuda one of the best testing jurisdictions on the planet, earning plaudits around the world. And it is innovation that was driven by Bermudian scientists, Bermudian technology companies, and Bermudian ingenuity and hard work. It is the same innovation that has seen our businesses evolve their models and showing more and more delivery services and others who have adopted to the new times and the new normal. We've also seen it in the retailers who are adopting their business models so they can better service not only locals, but also our visitors. And then there are those in our tourism industry who are modifying how they are servicing customers in the middle of a pandemic, and in some cases, not even waiting for airlift, but developing their own so they can make sure to keep Bermudians employed. This is the ingenuity that the country must continue to have as we move forward during this economic recovery. What I can state is, to date, we have done a good job, and we have certainly managed while keeping our economic matters, our testing regime in a very strong place, that it has certainly helped us, but we must continue to advance. Before I take questions from the media, I will let you know that that next week will be the last weekly press conference. With schools reopening, this wonderful location will transition back to the use of the Barclay Institute. What I will let you know is that individual ministers will continue to hold regular press conferences at the AB Place Media Room. However, the AB Place Media Room will not be large enough for effective social distancing for all ministers to be in one place at a time. So we will have these press conferences on a regular basis, and I will also make myself available, as it is important that we continue to answer the questions from the public via the media that you may have. So with that, I'm pleased to now take questions from the media for any of the ministers who are here in attendance.
Good evening, everyone. Maya Palacio here for Media Maya. My first question for Minister Wilson, from a community member, they want to know, when can rest homes be allowed for visitors?
There was information that was supplied to the owners and the operators of rest homes the Tuesday before Cup match, and it indicated that they have now entered into phase 2, which is permission for visitation as long as it's outdoors, maintaining physical distancing, mask wearing, and so forth. So that communication went out on the Tuesday before Cup match.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And now that we have reached 10 active cases on the island for COVID-19, I'm wondering, is saliva testing going to be allowed on the island now?
Saliva testing has been validated. We've spoken quite a lot about that extensively over the last several weeks. It has been validated, and in fact, we were part of a meeting this afternoon that spoke about wider use and distribution of saliva. So that is being discussed. Persons that enter Bermuda that do not have a pre-test are tested with the nasopharyngeal as well as the saliva test upon entry into Bermuda.
Thank you. Now, my next question had to do with education. I see the minister's not here, but I'm
The
hoping.
Minister of Education has arrived, and he will happily take your questions.
Oh. Good evening, Minister.
Good evening.
My first question has to do with the town hall meetings that were allowed. Why was it that teachers seemed to be a little bit excluded out of the town hall meetings, as there were like so many steps into getting into them? Most of them weren't able to get access to hear them. And why was that?
There was a purpose of having those town hall meetings, and the Department of Education is looking to create an environment where our parents can openly speak to the commissioner and respond to queries. So those town hall meetings were conducted exclusively for parents who have children within the Bermuda public school system. This week, the commissioner is conducting Zoom meetings with the teachers, and she's been conducting them with the teachers, the principals this week. And next week, she's looking to have Zoom meetings with students as well. What we want to do is have environments where people can speak freely and on the topics that are applicable to them directly.
And my next question, I know that there's going to possibly be more guidelines put out and given to teachers when you reopen schools, but one question from the community was, will remote learning still be an option?
As I discussed last week, The remote learning or the hybrid learning is it's only for students and staff who have been deemed vulnerable, extremely vulnerable to coronavirus, and that will require them to obtain a physician's note based on the guidelines that have been issued by the Department of Health. The hybrid model is not one where persons can opt in and out as they feel. It is only, but will be allowed for children and staff who are considered critically vulnerable. Everyone else is required to report to school.
Thank you very much. Those are my education questions. And my final question, I do want to ask Minister of National Security, has the Police Department of Bermuda given you any update on Officer Barbie and also Shabal Dylan Burgess?
Thank you very much. We meet on a weekly basis, and we have had an update with regard to that specific case. And the answer is that the investigation is ongoing, and that we continue to just liaise with the police service for any update or any resolution.
And on
While I
Officer
have
Barbie?
you, Media Maya, I had an outstanding question for you from 2 weeks ago. You asked about the co-ed facility, and I had the answer. And the simple answer is actually as a result of COVID-19. But the admin team at the facility is actively working on a plan to possibly restart the work release program. And with regards to family visits, they'll be looking to put a plan in place to see how they can start those again as well. But I must say that they have done virtual visits, VVs, over the last 5 months for family members to be able to communicate, talk, and see their the inmates.
Thank you very much. And sorry, I didn't think I'd heard an answer for Officer Barbie's case, though.
It's actively
It's
being
just active.
investigated.
Okay. Thank you.
Good evening. Health Minister, can you talk about the 2 police officers who have tested positive and how one person who's currently under investigation might have contracted the disease?
Thank you, Don. It is essential that I note that if the case is still under investigation, then we're unable to ascertain at this point how they did contract the disease. The World Health Organization's guidelines say that if following one incubation period, namely 14 days, the investigation hasn't resulted in a definitive answer as to how that person contracted it, then we then list it as local transmission with an unknown source.
And the situation with the 2 police officers? They're still isolated at this point?
When a person tests positive, then they have to, public health guidance is that they must remain isolated. So they're correct. They are isolated, yes.
Thank you. The government has assured parents and teachers that students will be safe in their classrooms. Do you have a red line limit with regard to local transmission that will cause you to close school as it happened in March? Or are you going to keep the schools open even if there's local transmission in the community? Is there a number sort of thing?
Right. That is very important to note that we are making progress with respect to identifying the alerts and the situations insofar as what the plans are for outbreaks. A lot of that will be based on a number of things. One is the nature of the outbreak insofar as how many students, staff, faculty members are affected, if any. Also, what is the community transmission level as well? So those are factors that will play into that. And it's important to note that we're trying to, which you hear us speak about the bubble, which is really important because we're trying to ensure that people remain in these bubbles as much as possible, even whilst they're in school, so that it'll be a lot easier. Sorry, it'll be harder for any type of potential transmission. However, again, we are working with the Department of Health, with the Department of Education, so that we can get that plan established and that will be communicated accordingly.
In this, just to follow up with that,
Mhm.
in the schools, if there's a case within a bubble, will it be then that that bubble is removed from the school, or will it be a whole school shut down?
That's a very good question indeed. The contact tracing will take place. If there is a case in a bubble, then that means that person will be required to isolate. However, during the course of the contact tracing, which we've spoken about numerous times during these press conferences, a lot of it will be determinable upon how many people may potentially be a contact. If, for example, there is a person in the bubble has had very minimal contact with anybody, then there will probably be less likelihood for there to be a requirement for the whole school to shut down. All those circumstances will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Much of it will be determined upon the nature of the contact.
Okay,
But I
thank you.
think what's important to note, and that's why we have the rules which have been put in place, though some persons are worried about them, that any student who is in a household where persons would have traveled will not be able to return to school for 14 days, making sure we take full and extra precautions in that measure.
Thank you. Staying with children, now that the saliva tests have been validated, will children under 9 be able to take them anytime soon? And what will be the age range for children?
Again, there was a meeting today, and we're still in discussions with respect to how the extent of the not usefulness, the extent of the application of the saliva test. And those conversations are taking place as recently as a couple hours ago.
All right. So next week, maybe?
Hopefully, yes, I'll
Hopefully.
be able
Okay,
to
thank you.
report more.
If the case under investigation turns out to be a true positive, then we are likely to have evidence of local transmission. How widely are we testing in the community, excluding new air arrivals? In other words, what percentage of the tests are being done on non-travelers?
At this point, over the last 10 days, we've tested over the last 10 days, 82% of all of our tests have been on travelers. However, as you've heard me mention previously, and I'd like to take this opportunity to repeat my plea that we have the pop-up testing, and we would like to encourage all individuals, particularly those individuals within the essential services or within industries where they have a lot of contact with people, such as beauty parlors, et cetera, to make themselves avail themselves of the free on-site pop-up testing at MDL as well as the other locations in Bermuda so that they can get tested. But with respect to the existing testing regime, under the last 10 days, 82% of those persons were travelers.
Thank you. How accurate are the local PCR tests in terms of sensitivity and specificity? Specificity. You know what I
I know what you mean.
you know what I mean. Yeah. How many cases are they expected to catch as percentage versus the cases they miss?
Well, with respect to the PCR nasopharyngeal, that has an 70% accuracy rate. However, it doesn't have anything to do specifically with the PCR test as opposed to the type of specimen and the time of collection, which is the one. Those two factors collectively will help to determine the accuracy with respect to the results. The PCR tests themselves are extremely sensitive, and they can pick up at least 2 strands of the virus. So that shows that they have quite a high degree of sensitivity.
Last question. How much, this is for the finance minister, how much will the government be paying in interest next year, and compare that to what we would have paid without the 1.3 billion new bond issue?
So, Don, the interest expense under the old capital structure, exclusive of the new bonds, would have been $124 million. The new number will be $127 million. Let me correct something. The Premier mentioned before $6 million of savings. That's $6 million of savings on the old debt stack, plus another $3 million of savings on the bank debt that were refinanced. So we are effectively borrowing $500 million more and paying for that $3 million is a difference.
Okay, thank
So
you very
we've
much.
substantially reduced the interest cost on an average basis.
Sorry for interrupting you. Thank you very much, though.
Sure.
Good evening. Yes, sir. Minister of Health, can you clarify, can you explain the difference between inactive case and positive cases?
I'm sorry.
Can you explain the difference between, as you started out by saying tonight, 10 active cases? Is that not considered 10 positive cases?
You're absolutely right. An active case is a positive case. That means that they are still active within, with respect to the virus. And so we would classify them as active, but in order to be active, you have to be positive.
Thank you. I just wanted you to clarify that for those that are viewing.
Okay.
My next question goes to the Premier. Premier, can you confirm members of the judiciary have refused to participate in the government's proposed 10% salary reduction that has been applied to all members of the public service? And can you also confirm that industrial action was threatened by this public officers at the judicial department?
Thank you for your question, Trevor. Yes, I can confirm that that is correct. That we were made aware of the possibility of industrial action by persons at the courts due to the displeasure that the officers of the courts have decided that they would not participate inside of the government's cost-cutting measures. This was a matter that I raised with the governor last week at our weekly meeting. On Wednesday, the governor undertook to discuss the matter with members of the judiciary, as the members of the judiciary come under the governor and not under the government. However, what I will say is that if the premier of the country can take a pay cut, if the governor of the country can take a pay cut, if the ministers of the cabinet can take a pay cut, if the chief justice can take a pay cut, if the registrar of the Supreme Court can take a pay cut, then I think that members of the judiciary should, in the spirit of shared sacrifice and recognition, should also participate in this scheme. It is disappointing that they haven't. The Minister of Finance has laid out very clearly the measures which are necessary and required. We hear a lot, I would say, from the bench in regards to the challenges of which exist in our community and the need for the government to find resources. The Minister of Finance has been creative in that stance by making sure that people do not have less take-home pay, but are able to save the government money so that we can redirect funds to unemployment benefits and support for persons who are unable to work. And it would just make sense that all persons would be able to participate in that. So we continue to work on those matters, and I'm hopeful, and I'm meeting with the governor tomorrow, so hopefully we will hear the update on that.
Thank you much. Also, this one for you, Premier. TNN understands that Dr. Karika Weldon has quit her position with the lab in St. George, and is also believed and understand that a position was created at the Bermuda College, and she's to start in September. We believe that Karika Weldon, Dr. Karika Weldon, is off island clearing up her affairs in England and is due to take up her post come September.
There's a whole lot of questions in that, and a whole
what
lot
do
of
you, what do you say to that,
things
sir?
which aren't correct. So let me try to help and put that together for you, Trevor. First, I can assure you that Dr. Weldon has not quit at the lab in
Okay.
St. George's. No,
Okay.
not whatsoever. And Dr. Karika Weldon, no. So that has not happened. What has happened, however, is that we are very fortunate, happy, and I am elated that Dr. Karika Weldon has decided to relocate from the United Kingdom to Bermuda.
Mhm.
And we will be establishing and moving the government lab from its temporary facility, which is at an undisclosed location, to a new and expanded facility at the Bermuda College. And that facility at the Bermuda College will not only enable Dr. Karika Weldon to establish the lab, a government laboratory there, but also to expand what is being done there, because some of the capacity issues which we're having with the increase of testing is due to the temporary nature of the small space of where Dr. Weldon and the molecular diagnostics lab is located.
Mhm.
But what the molecular diagnostics lab will do, it will enable us to start teaching laboratory science in Bermuda. And so this is an amazing accomplishment. I really wish that you would have allowed us to make the full and complete rollout, Trevor, but there will be a full and complete rollout nonetheless. I understand that you wanted to get the scoop, so that's fine. But just so we are clear, it is not correct that Dr. Weldon has quit her position,
Yes,
but
sir.
we are moving the lab from its undisclosed location to the Bermuda College, expanding the services which we'll offer, and making sure that we can expand the training opportunities that are there at the Bermuda College. And I think that this is something that is amazing, and Bermuda is very fortunate, and I'm myself pleased that a doctor who has taught overseas has decided to come back home and to assist us in the work of which we're doing.
Good stuff. My next question to you, Mr. Premier, again, is with the 12 o'clock bar shut down and no serving of alcohol from 12 up until 12 a.m., and this is for individuals that want to have parties in their backyard and serving alcohol or house at the home, what is the position on these individuals? I understand bars are shut down from 12 and serving alcohol because what it is, a few individuals have had police attend one or two parties and shut the party down at 12.
What I would say
How
is
long is this going to be in place?
is I would say most likely until the end of the public health emergency. We will revise things as is necessary. But right now, I would say, and the Minister of National Security can certainly speak to the compliance issues of which have happened in certain establishments. But we know that the police have shut down certain liquor license establishments for not necessarily following the rules. So we're going to make sure that we pay close attention to enforcement. As I've said, we've seen in numerous occasions overseas where the risks are at liquor license establishments and enclosed places, and others where persons will have a drink or two, a swizzle or two, and then decide to relax and lower their inhibitions, then it becomes a challenge. And so from that, we're trying our best to make sure that we keep that hold that line. We will make revisions as the time depends on it, but right now, I do not believe that the committee which meets has been prepared to make any revisions and has examined any revisions to that at this time. Ms. Ming, do you wish to add anything?
Sure. Travel, thank you for that question. The Premier is correct. We will look to consider as we move on, but right now, my ministry especially has been involved more in the enforcement side of it. And we have had meetings with the BPS, Bermuda Police Service, and what we've asked them to do is when they do a liquor license check, which they do on a regular and frequent basis, that they do a public health regulations check as well. So you're seeing that they are combining the two checks. So the enforcement side of it is there for the liquor license establishments, and there has been an instance where the police have used their enforcement powers to actually shut down an establishment for 24 hours. So the idea of it is that we're not trying to go out to be hard-nosed enforcement, but we need people to follow the rules and the regulations because we want to keep everyone safe and healthy. And so we don't want people to get complacent and forget what it is that we're actually doing, and that we are navigating through a pandemic, and we are trying to keep our community, our people healthy as we navigate through.
Thank you. Just to confirm, I'm on 4. Thank you very much. Minister of Education, the principal at Delwood had asked for a year of leave of absence, and as of today, when will you be announcing the new principal that's going to run that facility? The principal of Delwood had put in for a leave of absence. That means that the principal that was last year or last term is not there no more. So fill-in person for Delwood Middle.
Well, Trevor, as you know, personnel matters are just those personnel matters, and any announcements of acting principals or acting positions within the Department of Education will be communicated in due course.
And these are coming from parents. They want to know who they're working with running the facility.
I do know that we have a raft of acting positions that will be announced shortly, and when they are announced, that's when they'll be put out to the public.
Thank you. My last question for Minister of National Security. Madam Minister, there have been complaints that there are different rules for white officers and black officers at the BPS. Officers have told myself that the situation involving Superintendent Jill Maury is a case in point. Mrs. Maury was accused of assault by a constable who has been suspended. The feeling is that the BPS management is dragging its feet on these issues while it has moved quickly to suspend the officer that made the initial complaint. By any chance, have you communicated or have you heard anything or communicated from the Commissioner of Police on these matters?
Yes, Trevor, I have communicated with the Commissioner of Police on this matter, and I can say that I have no problem raising any issue with the Bermuda Police Service Commissioner, whether it be to do with race, culture, or anything like that. And this matter in particular was raised to him very recently, and he has assured me that the investigation is active, and I've let him know that it's one that I would like to um, kind of get a resolution for, and he has promised to continue to update me on the matters with regards to it.
Good evening, Sarah Lagan from the Royal Gazette. First of all, we've heard that there is a Minister of Health. There is a shortage of PPE with our essential workers, doctors and dentists. Can you confirm that and perhaps comment, please?
No, I can't confirm that. I do know that there are some shortages of certain items, such as aprons. And as I've spoken about previously, we were looking to get the reusable aprons. But insofar as private physicians and doctors having a shortage of PPE, I can't confirm or deny that.
Can't confirm or deny that?
No, I don't know anything about it.
Okay. Question for Mr. Dickinson. You'd mentioned that I believe 3 unions were in agreement with your plans. I think last time you spoke, there were still questions hanging over the uniform services. Can you give us any information about that?
Discussions with the uniform services continue.
Continue?
Yes.
Is there a timeline on the outcome of that?
Sarah, I don't know how long a piece of string is, and so I can't tell you when it's going to be resolved, but I know that we are working hard to get it resolved.
Okay. Do we have any handle on how many residents have left Bermuda since, I guess, the outbreak of COVID-19? We've been hearing a lot of headlines of hotel workers leaving. Do we have a figure? Are you keeping track?
Do we have a figure and are we keeping track? The answer is no. We'll be able to certainly try to get a figure given the travel patterns and doing some data mining on our immigration systems. We will be able to do that, but we have not yet done that.
Okay. Question for the Minister of Education. Hi. Good evening. There have been some concerns about school buses. There were problems before COVID came along with getting kids to school on the buses, and a lot of people think it's, things can only get worse with the current climate. In terms of safety, like pupil safety, getting kids to school and being able to physical distance, it's one thing with adults, it's perhaps another thing with students, younger students in particular. Are there going to need to be monitors, members of staff monitoring children to ensure that they are sticking by the regulations on the school buses? And is there a plan in place to do that?
That is a very interesting question. I thank you for asking that, because it's something that we have been discussing with the Department of Education, with the Department of Public Transportation as well. And the idea that our children are responsible to the Department of Education once they reach school. And so we're trying to figure out how could something like that be put in place. What we do encourage is our parents to talk to your children and make sure that they understand what that they're supposed to do on their way to school. We can't possibly have someone there for every single possibility with our children, and we will rely on parents quite heavily to talk to their children, get them to understand the things that need to happen, and teach them the proper way to handle themselves when leaving the house and getting to the school grounds. But with that said, it is something that is under discussion between the Department of Education and the Department of Public Transportation.
Okay, another question for you. With the announcement tonight that there's going to be a delay to the start of school, could you outline some of the pertinent points, perhaps some of the bigger concerns that have led to this decision?
The teachers are back in our schools on September 1st, and the children were scheduled to come back on September 9th. It is mandatory that teachers have a minimum of 2 days to get their classrooms together. So when we looked at the amount of time that would be in place to make sure that teachers had practiced the various guidelines of the entry and exit protocols and how things would happen within the school, it was decided that it would be best to give some time to allow several run-throughs with teachers on site to ensure that they understand and that we could see any potential hiccups that may occur and have opportunity to fix them. At the end of the day, the important thing is making sure that our facilities are safe for all of our staff and students to return to. And so an extra 3 days will give us that opportunity to ensure that everyone is on the same page, and any potential things that can come up while you're doing your actual run-throughs can be solved and eliminated before children get on site.
Can I repeat that question without using up another question? Because it was the pertinent concern. Obviously, you're going to have a run through, but are there any serious concerns that parents, teachers are having?
No, there isn't any particular concerns. It was just something as we were discussing with the BUT, as the Premier had announced, when we were having our weekly conversations with the BUT, and we were going through, stepping through how the days between teachers coming in and the students coming in, how they could work in terms of what normally goes on. That's when the decision was made. The idea came about was, well, what about if we just delay the students coming in by 3 days to give us just that extra time? And so there was nothing in particular that led to that. It's just taking the opportunity to give everyone a little extra time to get comfortable with the protocols.
Okay, one more question.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the members of the media for their questions this evening. Thank you for the attention of which you paid to us this evening. As I stated, we will be back here again next week, Thursday. In closing, I want to remind persons that it's very simple, just as the Minister of Health said. Simple rule: avoid the three C's: closed spaces, crowded places, and close contact settings. Wear your masks, wash your hands, stop shaking hands, and let's make sure that we continue to remain vigilant so that we can keep any transmission of this virus on our shores at bay. With that, thank you all, and good night, Bermuda.